Today we're really blessed with, last week we had one of our judicial candidates at High Noon Club speaking, Judge Deason, and I think everyone enjoyed his presentation. And today we're blessed one more time. We've got two additional candidates that are running for Oklahoma County Judicial Districts. We've got, these are current sitting judges, Thomas Prince and Roger Stewart. So thank both of our guests here this afternoon. We also have one of our own, what I'm going to call one of our own, Judge Cindy Truong here, that is running unopposed this election year, and I know that you appreciate being able to do that, correct? You know, these judge races are very difficult because in Oklahoma, I think that most of us are all very blessed to live here in the state because we're so conservative. And what does that actually mean? Well, I think it means socially conservative and fiscally conservative and constitutionally conservative. That's what I think it actually means. Now, some people find offense with that. Well, sorry, you're living in the state of Oklahoma, and you might be better suited to go to one of the other states that does not believe in that, because you do have a 10th Amendment right to move yourself around in various places in the United States. So let's not apologize for our conservative values. But anyway, let's kind of move on with our program this afternoon. And again, I thank our guests for being here this afternoon, Judge Prince and Roger Stewart. There was one thing that was brought up last week that I found out very interesting, was a vetting process. So both of these sitting judges have been appointed by Governor Fallin. And Roger Deason, Judge Deason, brought up the point that what I thought was very interesting. He talked about the vetting process and how difficult that was going before the Bar Association being vetted that way. It's much easier maybe running for an office that you're not vetted other than by the people. So I thought that was a very valuable point that I had never heard or never thought of before. Another announcement.
Just a couple quick ones. If you think the OU art issue is still not live, that's just because the Daily Oklahoma isn't going to print anything. But that's being circulated worldwide, so we'll still get some movement there.
Okay, let's move on with our guests. Let's start out with our special judge Thomas Prince. Now I've known Thomas Prince from a while. You can come to the podium and start out if you'd like, and give us why you're running for election. Then we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. And now I know that you have worked very diligently in the years past for the Republican Party. I do know that. Okay? And we won't hold that against you.
Oh boy. It's an honor to stand before you today. And one of the limitations that we as judges have is that we're unable to tell you how we're registered. Now, I had no idea what Mr. Danny was about to say. But I have to be honest with you that it's troubling to me when I get introduced that way. It's awkward for me because we are to treat everyone equally. You know, when someone comes into my courtroom, I don't ask them how they're registered. They don't ask how I'm registered. We, as judges, are just like any other elected official in this way, that our powers come from the people. They're subordinate and limited to the people. And that all comes under a constitutional and statutory rubric. And we are required to treat everyone equally. Okay? And so I want you to know that up front. I grew up in a small town in southeast Oklahoma. My mom and dad owned a furniture and appliance store in Idabel, Oklahoma. McCurtain County is my home. Still have plenty of family all over McCurtain County. I came up here with my wife 35 years ago in 1979. And we've been married 35 years. We've lived here 35 years and made that our home. We have 5 kids. 4 of them are married. They've all attended college and graduated, and we're very proud of that. Of the 5, 4 are married. 4 of them live here. 1 lives in Tulsa with her husband. very proud of our kids, and I'm proud of my wife. She has done a lot of interesting things. Was a stay-at-home mom for a while, was a paramedic for a while, for about 12 years in Norman, and now she's a small businesswoman. So that's a little bit about me. A little bit more, I guess I should tell you, I practiced law for almost 30 years before I went on the bench. And I can tell you all about that. Some of you in the room I know, and you know about my background. But a judge passed away in 2011, Twyla Mason Gray, and it was just really good timing for me to apply to become a judge. And as Mr. Danny said, I went through the Judicial Nominating Commission process like Judge Stewart. And what he didn't tell you about that vetting process is that there are 15 folks on the committee, and of the 15, only 6 are attorneys. Not only cannot be a lawyer, they can't be married to a lawyer, nor anybody in their immediate family a lawyer. They have to promise not to run for public office for the next 5 years. And it's a balanced politically, no one party can have a majority on that committee. So it's 15 of them, and that has, you probably, I'm looking around the room, you guys are all very knowledgeable folks. And you probably known in times past that it only involves 6 people, all of who were lawyers. The legislature has amended it over the years, and now it's a majority non-legal makeup of that committee. And it is a strenuous vetting process, and I was honored to go through it and was recommended to the governor with 2 other fine men, and the governor appointed me in April 2012. And I have been on the bench about 2.5 years. I was initially assigned to a family docket. After about 8 years, another judge retired, and now I have what I call a civil trial docket. So I primarily handle civil trial cases. Occasionally I'll do a criminal case, but a civil trial. Now, why does it matter who your civil judges are? So if you have a breach of contract case, okay? You have a boundary dispute. Essentially, if it's not criminal, not probate, not juvenile, not family, we get it. So it's just everything else. Boundary disputes, foreclosures, injury cases, car crashes, slip and falls. Those are the kind of cases that we get. So it's very important who your judges are. And I believe, you know, when I first got up here, I wanted you to know how I feel about fairness. And the fair administration of the judicial system is something I'm passionate about. Treating everyone equally, regardless of affiliation, regardless if you're the richest man in town or you're not the richest man in town. When you come into my courtroom, I'm going to do my best to treat you fairly. I'm going to run my courtroom efficiently, but I'm not going to be a tyrant. I understand sometimes that lawyers are late to court. Okay, that happens. And if it's your lawyer who's late to court, you're going to want me to show him some grace. Okay? You want me to be efficient and run my courtroom efficiently and fairly. And I'm going to apply the rule of law to the best of my ability, to the facts of the case. So I told you something about myself. I told you something about the process. And I think I want to end with this and open it up to any questions that you may have. That running for election as a judge is awkward, but it's a balance that the legislature struck in the late 60s. You probably recall or have read that there was a court scandal in the 60s. And they implemented this process, it's called the Modified Missouri Plan, where your appellate judges, our appellate judges, are just retained or not retained. There's not someone running against them. But trial judges, like Judges Truong and Judge Stewart and I and Judge Deason that you heard from last week, we can draw opponents. And so we run like others. And that's how it's modified. Now the Missouri plan, that pure Missouri plan, was that all judges would be on a retention ballot, retained or not retained. But the compromise was reached at trial judges. So this year, in all 77 counties, every district judge had to file for election. And only those of us who drew opponents are on the ballot. Now I have a district within Oklahoma County. It's even more complicated for Tulsa and Oklahoma counties, and that we have. Does anyone in the room know how many judges, there are district judges, there are in Oklahoma County? There are 15 of us. And you have 3 of them in the room with you today. Judges Truong and Judge Stewart are elected on a county-wide basis. Judge Deason, that you heard from last week, and myself are elected from sub-districts within the county. Now, there are reasons for that, and I can try to explain them to you if you want to hear about it. But my district essentially is from Bryant Avenue to May, a strip of the county from Waterloo to 89th, Valley Brook to Oak Tree on the east side. It gets skinny in the middle, kind of narrows. I've got all of downtown Oklahoma City and Nichols Hills in the village, but I have a big swath of South Oklahoma City, from Valley Brook to OCCC on the south side, and North Oklahoma City and West Edmond on the north end. So you have to live within my district to vote for me, but my decisions affect everyone in Oklahoma County. If you want to see a map of my district, you can go to my website, keepjudgeprince.com. I appreciate you doing that. We have some signs up in the district. I have some signs here today. If you're welcome to, if you want a sign, I'd ask you to take one. I hope everyone has some material, and I would appreciate your consideration on November 4th.
Let's go to Q&A, and I'll kind of run it forward with my finger. Any Q&A? Any questions? You know, Judge,
I got one.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Judge Prince, I'm Jerome Montgomery. Can I ask you a basic question?
Yes, sir.
Having to do with a moral issue. Are you for abortion or are you against abortion?
One of the limitations we have, and I appreciate the question, and it's, you know, we get asked questions like that periodically, but there's a reason we can't answer them. Because it's the kind of question that might come before me, so I can't rule on it or comment on it. Secondly, I'm prohibited from taking positions on political issues.
That is a very difficult question to answer, okay? Even under the current situation here. I am someone that this legislative year, we are going to attempt to change certain things regarding our legislative process and how we elect our district court judges. But the way the rules set today, Jerome, it becomes a question that he can't answer. And if he does answer, what's going to happen, he's going to be brought up on charge by the Bar Association, and he's going to go through a process, and his opponent could also use that against him, saying that he's under violation of the ethics laws in Oklahoma County, which we know a little bit about because, well, I'm going to say that, I'm going to use her name, and I hope she doesn't mind me doing that. I know another judge in this that's not running this year, that when she was running, wound up being her situation. And not that your question is not on point, but it's one that he can't answer right now. So let's move on, okay, move on. And what you're gonna have to do, you're gonna have to ask certain people about Judge Prince and how he thinks about that particular question.
The reason I asked that, Bob, is because as a citizen, as a person who studied.
Sit down.
No, wait a minute, who said that? I mean, we're not gonna do that. I mean, Jerome, thanks for the question. It's a great question, and it's a question that frustrates me more than probably anybody in this whole room, because, and it's not Judge Prince's fault because of this. It's the system that we live under. I believe that our process of elected people, we should get to answer questions like that, and it shouldn't be determined by somebody else. But it is. That's the rules right now, and we're just going to have to live with them. Is there somebody wants to?
Can I add
Yes.
something?
Yes. Could you stand up?
Yes.
And tell us who you are.
I'm Cindy Truong. But as judges, we are bound by the law. We have to follow the law. So if you want to change the law, you have to call your legislature, the governor, and change it there. I mean, we're bound what the law is. I mean, of course, we have our personal opinions, and we have our moral and ethics that we have to follow, but you know, the law are there and we have to follow it. And if you disagree with the law, you have to change this with your legislature. You have to, I mean, a good judge have to follow the law, and it's in the book, and you have to go by that. But if you want to change that law, and you disagree with it, the courtroom is not the place for us to do it or jurors to do it. So what you need to do is call your legislature, call the governor, and start with Mr. Russell here and do it there. But, you know, so judges, you want to elect someone who's fair, who will listen to both sides and follow the law, because you don't want judges to get up there on the bench and start making their own law, because that's wrong. So, if that helps.
Any other questions? Do you have any other? Okay. And again, that's a very frustrating part. I know for certain people in this room, that's how frustrating. But the man, he's not running to be a legislator. He's running to be a judge, and we want a fair judge. I mean, that's what we want.
I'll add something else too. I mean, there's many times that I don't agree with the law, but I still have to follow it.
Which
It's
one-
just like everybody else.
Could I cut you off a little bit? Which ones don't you agree with them?
Speeding, how about speeding?
Oh, we'll take the fifth on that one. Dia, okay. Any other we got a question? Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. Judge, and I agree that y'all are bound by the law, but it seems to me that you don't take an oath, I don't believe, to uphold the law, you take an oath to uphold the Constitution. So I'm wondering, if you find a personal conflict between the law and the Constitution, do you feel bound by the law, or do you feel bound by the Constitution? And if that's outside of the current scope, then I can accept that, but if you can answer it, that'd be
Well,
great.
we apply the whole body of the law. Includes the Constitution.
Good answer.
Yes, sir.
I'm Steve Lewis, and I have a question. It's probably out of bounds as well. So you guys can yell, sit down. But what is your position on the Sharia law and those who are attempting to make that part of our legislative and judicial process here in Oklahoma?
I'll pass on that, Mr. Lewis, but thank you.
All right.
You know, the Sharia law really is, and I'm going to make this. I'll make this call here from this bench over here. That all changed with American laws for American courts, and when we changed, it was the last legislative session or two years ago. So again, you're not specifically going to mention any other law. It's American laws for American courts. And what does that i.e. mean? That means the United States Constitution and the Oklahoma Constitution, just flat wrong. And it doesn't have nothing to do with Sharia, and it doesn't have anything to do with Indian law either. Okay, it's American laws for American courts. The American Constitution and the Oklahoma Constitution. Judge Prince, could I ask, would you agree with my statement or not?
Pass.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna not get into the question of Sharia law.
Is there, I'm gonna go along the same lines in with Judge Truong. Is there any laws in Oklahoma that you don't agree with?
Oh, come on.
Don't answer, I'm kidding you, okay. Does anybody have any other questions from Judge Prince?
You invited the nice man here to talk to us, and now we attack him. I don't understand.
He's
that.
not under attack.
Yes, he was.
Judge,
You're
I'm
welcome.
Richard. Why is it they won't explain nullification to a jury?
Well, because the concept of nullification is contrary to the law, okay? We are not allowed, the jury is instructed to follow the law. It's my duty to instruct them to follow the law. And that's why nullification is not allowed to come up in my courtroom. You know, like Judge Truong said, I'm a trial judge. I apply the law. And the law is that the jury is told to follow the law as I instruct them. It's just straightforward.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm Glenn Howard. Since the law does say an Oklahoma American law for American courts, why would you be reluctant to express support for a law that is currently on the books?
Well, there are two reasons. Because it is still a political issue, and it is an issue that could come before me. So I, as a judicial officer, am bound heart and soul to this code of judicial conduct. And that requires that everyone that comes into my courtroom is treated the same. regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your religion, regardless of your political affiliation. That's where I started this conversation, and it's probably where I'm going to end it.
But isn't the law applicable to all?
Well, absolutely. The law is applicable to everyone.
See, that's what makes this process very difficult, in my humble opinion, because the way that our state statutes have been set up for these people to run as judges, you really almost can't ask them any questions. And to me, it's a very frustrating thing. I believe the founders of our Oklahoma Constitution and our legislative bodies wanted us to have elections. And they wanted us to have, now on election, what questions do you get to ask? Well, I think you can ask anything as a public citizen of anybody. And it's not their fault. I'm not blaming any judge that's running right now, no more than I would be. And where I really learned about this is when Cindy Truong was running her race, when we first discovered that. That's why I say, from my podium, I would like to say some legislative changes happen in the Oklahoma legislature. But the problem with it is them finding the courage to be able to do that, because they need to find the courage to change what I'm going to say a bad law, i.e. either this or we quit running these judges for these elections. Some states, they do not have elections for judges. We need to do one or the other. We need to have a fair election or no election, one or the other. Okay, any other questions? Let's see, I know there was another question. One more question? Did you have a question? Okay, last question, okay?
My name's Karen, and through my studying of what's been going on, it's been noted that the judges now are only using the results of other cases back to 1929. Did we toss out the other laws?
I'm unaware of that, ma'am.
It's been
There's no
reported.
time limit put on the precedential value of the court decisions that we use. Now, you know, in the state of Oklahoma, I got asked this question about, well, does all law apply? And absolutely, from the Constitution
You
down
go
to the
back
city
directly
ordinances.
to the law, not just the cases from other courts.
I look first to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. That's when my cases are appealed, they appeal upstream, and I am accountable to the appellate bench. And they first want me to answer what do the statutes and the Constitution say, and has it been previously interpreted by the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Now, if there's not a case from the Oklahoma Supreme Court on point, where do I go? I try to look to other states that have similar statutes, similar cases. Absolutely, and there's no time limit put on
And
those.
you don't just use our laws, the American laws.
No, I didn't say that. I used the court decisions of the United States of America. Okay? Does that answer your question?
See, let me help you out.
Thank you.
I'm the one that said that. He didn't say that, okay? I'm the one, American laws for American courts, okay?
Yeah.
But what you do, that's the difficulty in, how many people here have actually ever been to a courthouse, been in a trial? Let's raise your hand. Most people are never gonna go down to county courthouse or federal courthouse. You're just not gonna happen. Most people in this room, the only thing that you'll ever come in common with at the courthouse is probably a domestic dispute, and it'll probably be most likely a divorce case. That's gonna happen.
In our courthouse, on the first floor is where we have the domestic relations docket. We have 5 judges down there that do divorce court. We have it on the first floor because that's why most people come to our courthouse, is for a divorce child custody case.
So the legal process is a little differently than most people actually think. It's not perfect, but I'm gonna make this point. I actually want somebody like you sitting on a bench, okay, that's gonna find favor in the law, not in personal opinion, okay? You want to do that, okay? And I wouldn't care if he's a Democrat, independent, whatever he is, I mean, Republican or whatever he is, I want him to do the law. I don't want him to do his opinion, I want him to do the law. And that's a hard thing to do, okay? That's very hard, okay, with certain cases. Thank you, Judge Prince. Thank you. Our next guest is the Honorable Roger. The is the Honorable Roger Stewart. And the great thing about it, Judge Stewart, there's no more bullets left. The bullets have all been discharged. Yeah.
Don't believe him. I really do. My name is Roger Stewart. I've been a judge for 20 years. 16 of those years I was juvenile judge out in the juvenile courts. And in 2011, Governor Fallin appointed me to replace Noma Gurich, who became a Supreme Court justice. I was Governor Fallin's first judicial appointment. I was very proud of that fact. I went through the processes that everybody's explained. It's kind of hard to go second. I do the same docket Judge Prince does, and that's basically everything civil, medical malpractice cases, slip and fall cases, car wrecks, foreclosures on mortgages, collections, eminent domain. The books are full. There's 70 some odd volumes of our statutes, and so it's a very wide thing. Let me tell you, and let me just share my frustration also from what we can say and what we can't say. But, and my frustration there is simply because I've had so many people tell me that we don't, how do we find out about elections? How do we find out about judges and all that kind of stuff? And you know, there's only so many forums, there's only so many groups like this. This county has 780-something thousand people in it, and 380-something are registered. So how does a person over a 7-month campaign process, how do they let people know who they are? And I think Judge Prince and me and Don Deason and others, I think we've appeared in hundreds of Rotary clubs and Kiwanis. And so I want to thank all of you for giving me a forum and giving us a forum to be able to talk to you about who we are. What I've done to try to explain who I am is I put a web page up. Okay, that was the first step. And my daughters, when my daughters found out that I couldn't say what my positions were, I told them, well, I'll tell people about myself. They could read my web page. They read my web page. They said, that's really boring. So I reread it, and I didn't even make it all the way through. I mean, it was. But that'll tell you, if you want to know about me, that will tell you as much of who I am as anything I could point you to. I've been married 34 years. I've lived in the same house 30 years. I told you this would be boring. I'm a lifelong resident of Oklahoma County. I graduated from Del City High School. Oh. So let's talk about why Del City produces so many great this running for office thing, and I've been told not to say this, but it's hard. I have brand new respect for anybody who chooses to run for office. It's hard. It's been difficult for me, difficult for my wife, difficult for my family. It's not something I really wanted to do. You'll talk about the greatness of our political process, which I share in, but I'm just not made. Like I say, I come from Del City. I am who I am. I'm not fancy. I'm not anything. I graduated from OU. Graduated from OU Law School. I practiced law for 16 years. I prosecuted in the DA's office under Andy Coates, who I'm proud to say supports me in this campaign. I worked for the United States Attorney's Office as assistant, prosecuting federal crime under David Russell and also under Bill Price. I'm proud to say Bill Price supports me in this process. I have lots of endorsements out there from political candidates and all, and I'm just who I am. I've been a judge for 20 years. I want to reemphasize something, and this is what I think is the most important quality of the judge, and y'all have already talked about it, so it's no great revelation, but what I do is follow the law and what the law says. It's not how I want the law to be. It's not what I want the law to be. It's what the law is. And that's what a judge has to do And that's what I'm bound to do under my oath, is to support and defend the Constitution of both the United States and the Constitution of the state of Oklahoma. And I swore to God twice now under that oath, and that is what I do. I'll guess be happy to take your questions.
My name is Jim Gorgas. In the time you served as a district judge, could you tell us what percentage of the trials over which you presided were decided by, how many were bench trials? What percentage?
Oh, I'd say more jury trials than bench trials. Now, I was out in juvenile court where we had a number of bench trials, but in juvenile court, there's jury trials also. Jury trials for kids that commit crime, but also jury trials for parents of abused and neglected children when the state seeks to terminate their parental rights.
Well, the reason I ask, particularly about serving as a district judge, is there a place for someone who's not legally trained, that maybe just has too much time on their hands, to go and find the proceedings of the court, particularly in courts, in cases where perhaps you served in where it was a bench trial? Is there a way to do that?
Absolutely. OSCN Network, there's a web page out there, the OSCN. I think Oklahoma's way ahead of a lot of states.
Yeah.
OSCN web page, you can Google OSCN.
I've been there, but I've never quite been able to find what I'm looking for.
Okay, well, look under search dockets, and then they'll have a list, and you can go down all dockets or Oklahoma County.
All right, and thanks, sir.
Okay. You can Google in. You can also Google in the name of the case numbers. You can Google the judge's name.
Is everybody familiar with OCN? Oklahoma Supreme Court Network? Okay. We are very blessed to be in Oklahoma and to have that as part of our system, because not all states have that.
Yes. We're way
That's
ahead.
a great resource right there.
Absolutely.
To use that. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Stand up and your first name.
My name is Jim. Thank you for being here. When did lawyers become only people that could be judges? Wasn't there a time in our history when commoners could be judges?
Well, you know, I don't, boy, now that's a good question. I don't know. I'd have to defer. Why didn't you ask him?
He had enough on his plate.
I know of stories. You know, there was a time when lawyers weren't products of law school, that they studied the law underneath another lawyer. Certainly the amount of training that lawyers had was kind of nebulous, maybe in some instances. I think about names in the past and stuff like that. But that's the way it's been for quite a while, at least since statehood here.
Yeah.
I don't know of any time during statehood in Oklahoma that it was not limited to lawyers. Now, you know, you go to Arkansas and county commissioners are called judges. You go to certain areas of the United States and judges are this or judges are that. You go to Tennessee and they actually refer to the district attorney as a general or colonel, I think it is, something like that. Anyway, with military names.
And I think if you go to Texas, the justices of peace are called judges. And I think that's kind of where Jimmy's going with this one thing. An elected person in the state of Texas go before justice of the peace.
Well, you know, you're right. You're going back before the 60s with the change in our deal when we had justice of the peace. But the ones I know about were all lawyers. The ones that I've known.
I was going back to the founding
Right.
of the nation.
Right.
Isn't that true?
That at one time they weren't judges or they weren't lawyers?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, let's kind of expand on this, even though this is not a question for Judge Stewart, but to be a member of the United States Supreme Court, you do not have to be an attorney. I mean, how many in this room knew that or didn't know that? I mean, we assume that everybody had to be an attorney or that type thing, but you don't have to be. So sometimes, remember, we get so sophisticated in what we believe our education system is, we forget about the founders and what they actually thought about some parts of our law. So remember, that's the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court of the United States. You do not have to be an attorney to be a judge on that bench. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am? I know, you gotta do it. You gotta do it. Stand up and give us
No,
your
I don't
name.
got to, I don't got to.
No, she don't have to.
No, I don't. I stand. Both of you candidates speak of the qualification process. How about your opponents? Did they go through that?
No.
Ah,
Well, how does that work? Tell us.
Well, yeah, but Sandra, that's a very simple question. Answer though in a way. I mean, go, you want to answer it or I'll answer it?
Well, I mean, the question specifically is whether they go through this process, and the answer is no. I mean, I don't know how to expand on that.
Well, why do you have to go through the process and they don't?
Well, because I was appointed, okay, I didn't take office, I didn't run for office. I was appointed, I was in the special
you say
judge,
that.
and I was appointed by the governor. And before the governor's going to appoint anybody, the way our system is set up is we need to know who they are, and we need to make sure that we've got an OSBI background check on them. We've got to make sure that they're vetted through the lawyers and citizens of the county.
Do your opponents go through that process? Do they have to be a lawyer?
They have to be a lawyer, but they don't
Who
go.
says that? When they sign up, when they go to the election commission?
It was 4 years of experience as a lawyer. They have to have 4 years of
We fill
experience
the
as a lawyer.
vacancy.
Huh?
And we fill the vacancy. We filled a vacancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, all you need is 4 years as an attorney and pay $200. That's all you need to get your name on the ballot.
And who checks that out? Is the election commission, who knows that they are attorneys?
Well, usually the opponent, they would check it out and challenge it. It's not.
That's up to me.
Okay, I'll make this real simple. Now, Sandra's an attorney, okay? No, she should, I'm gonna say know that, okay? This kind of stuff because we're doctors of the law, right? Okay, but here will always do your backgrounds for you, your opponent. They'll always do that vetting. And it's kind of the best vetter out there is a disturbed wife. I mean, a disturbed wife undomesticated. So anything you want to find out, your opponent will do all the due diligence. You never have to worry about it and that kind of thing. But again, the reason that they were vetted is because they were appointees on a vacancy. That was the reason. Now, the guys you really got to feel sorry for are the ones that were vetted and they didn't get the job. Those poor guys, I mean, it's out there that, do you understand the humor involved in that? There was 3 finalists that went through that vetting process and 2 of them didn't get appointed. Now, you got to feel sorry for them, Jim, don't you? No, you don't. Okay, let's move on. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Carlene, and I want to thank you all for running for office. And in the past, I have called my friends that were lawyers and said, who should I vote for? So thank you all for coming and talking so I can put a name to a face and make my own decision. So I want to compliment you guys for doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, if there's no question, that's a great way to end this whole thing. And oh, wait a minute, we got one more question. I'm sorry. But let me just say this, my compliments to both of you. I mean, because this is a very difficult thing. Anybody, and I mean anybody, that's ever run for public office, you've got my respect because things change once you become a candidate in your life forever. Mike.
Okay, I'm Mike. And I'm sorry, we gave Judge Stewart, Judge Prince enough tough questions that I was just, we need to ask you. And actually, it's probably not that tough. We've heard that what binds you guys right now from speaking out on things is the law. But I believe it's just orders of the Judicial Commission or the Bar Association. It's not actually in the statutes. Do you know the answer to that? And if you do, then I have a follow-up.
Well, it's the Supreme Court that sets out the standards, and they're not unlike other state standards where they have elections.
No, I understand, but my point is, it's not in the statutes. So it becomes difficult for the legislature to speak out on that issue if we don't like what the Supreme Court has done. And so...
I've not seen that it's hard for the legislature to speak out on anything.
You're right. So my point is, though, it becomes difficult for the legislature to change that if the Supreme Court wants to give us no implication to any of the people in the room, supremely unqualified candidates for other jobs. They can do that by muzzling the ability to speak out about those individuals, and qualified candidates can't. And so the Supreme Court could give us the absolute worst judicial candidates on the face of the earth just by their rules that the legislature doesn't have the ability to overturn. It's not really the law, it's their rules, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But let me also, probably shouldn't even wade into this. But these laws come on the heels, and if you listen to KTOK this morning, you heard John Eccles talk about, and we've all read about, the Corn Court back in the 60s when this whole thing was divided up. I mean, it was Republican Democrats, okay? Only back then it was all Democrats, all right? Bribery everywhere. Justice Corn said that he knew he had ruled on cases he hadn't taken a bribe on, but he couldn't specify one of them. And well, let me tell you, I mean, I was in high school. I was in grade school at the time. But let me tell you how all that worked. I mean, there was lawyers bribing Supreme Court. It was Democrats were the ones in control. It was actually Henry Bellman. The reform started with Henry Bellman as governor and ended with Dewey Bartlett. All right. The Republicans fought tooth and nail to get this system, while the Democrats, specifically, if you remember J.D. McCarthy,
Amen.
fought it tooth and nail. So anyway, I just want to hand it. You know, I don't know that there's any good system of picking a judge. I think that we've come up in Oklahoma with a system that kind of has some give and take in it and does pretty good. I know that I've heard John Eccles say that the Texas legislature wishes they could get the system like this because of the scandals and the problems and the big money that goes into the Texas elections.
So this is my little follow-up then. So my follow-up would be then, if I were to ask you if you've ever taken a bribe while you were a judge, you would say you can't answer that question because of the Supreme Court rules. And that's tongue-in-cheek there, right?
Well, yeah, let's do this. That's not a follow-up question. That right there is Mike Reynolds. That is a Mike Reynolds always having to say the last word. That's not a question. Again, our privilege of having both at High Noon Club, and any of these two men you can see would make outstanding judges in our Oklahoma County Courthouse. And thank you both for coming. And please come again. I mean, you're always invited. You don't have to be at the podium to come to High Noon Club no more than Judge Truong has to come. She's a member of the High Noon Club too. And the way you become a member of the High Noon Club is you come twice. The first one's on you, the second one's on us. So anybody says that you come twice, you're a member of the High Noon Club, and you're some subversive group, you can say, well, okay, fine.
If I come back.
No. No, you don't have to because I'm going to quit asking them and answering myself. Because I may one of these days want to run for another another political office. And I don't want this to be held against me either.
They have enough already.
They already know enough?
They already got enough.
Okay, they already got enough. But anyway, thank you very much for coming. You're welcome to stay the rest of the meeting. And or you can get up and leave and go back to your courthouse. But again, thank you very much for coming to High Noon Club. Now what I'd like to do is, last week was brought up the question about some of these state questions that we have on the ballot. We've got 3 state questions. State question 769, state question 770, and then state question 771. State question 769 is the one that, well, actually, I was going to say they're all real easy to me, and the answer that I'm going to give you right up front, I'm not going to be any kind of bias towards this at all. Vote for all 3 of them, yes. And the reason being...
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. The reason being, I'm going to ask Mike Reynolds to kind of help me out here a little bit. State question 769 came up as a question, and what it really has to do with, can you be an elected person in Oklahoma and then go into the military service without having to give up that position in our state government? And we're Riz out of, let's see, it was I think 3 or 4 years ago with Rex Duncan, who's a DA, and he was elected to his office. He's a soldier with the infantry in the 45th Infantry Division, got called to go over to overseas, back to Afghanistan, and the question came up with Attorney General Scott Pruitt, that he wanted to see him, what I'm going to say it this way, wanted to see him removed from that office because he could not hold a military status and or a status as an elected official. Well, the state question was, or Pruitt's question on that was overturned at the Supreme Court, and for some reason, the legislative body found it favorable to go ahead and put it in a statute that would allow that if a soldier is activated in military service, he wouldn't have to give up his standing as an elected person. Now, it'll mention in the law that there's actually, not in the law, but in the question it'll mention 3 people that happened to. I know of 2 of them. Rex Duncan was one, and I believe Hopper Smith was another one. Now, who the other person was, I don't know. Hopper Smith was one of our elected representatives out of Tulsa. He vacated his office to go overseas. I wish he would not have done that. I wish he would have been able to serve his country and at the same time retain his position as a representative, because I think it brings favor to the body of the legislators to be able to do that. But nevertheless, that's actually what happened. So this state question, 769, somewhat clears that question up. So again, you can research it all you want. That's my opinion. I am definitely going to vote yes on this initiative. So let's move on to our next ones. And I'm going to ask Mike Reynolds to, yes, sir.
Just real quick, you're saying they should be able to be a soldier and a representative, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's elected official.
Oh, it's actually an elected official, yes. And if you do your research on it, you'll find that. I mean, now we're not talking about somebody in the military that's running for an office and being a regular full-fledged military person. We're talking about a person that was like in the National Guard that got activated to go overseas to serve.
Bob, if I could make a comment on that. It's been in the tradition of the United States, if you were in the Guard or Reserve or even back when we had militias, that has never been an issue. And the fact that it is in Oklahoma is, quite frankly, surprising. If you are a federal officer, you're prohibited from running anyway. But if you are a Guard or Reservist, if you worked for Devon and left and went overseas and you come back by law, Devon has to have your job waiting for you. And so the reason the Supreme Court overturned it is that they found it unconstitutional. It's really unusual that we would have the state question anyway for something that was found unconstitutional. It doesn't mean that full-time federal officers can run. They can't. That's not even on the table. If you got a captain stationed at Tinker, he can't run for office. He can't be on city council. He can't do anything. School board, nothing. But if you're a reservist or a guardsman, that's different. And it's always been within the traditions of our country that people have been able to do that. Lindsey Graham deployed to Iraq as a United States Senator because he's a reservist. And you've got a lot of examples of that. So it's kind of surprising that we even have it, but nevertheless, it's on the ballot.
And thanks for kind of answering that way, Steve, because I think something else is going to happen. We're going to see a lot more happen. We're going to see a lot more of our reservists being activated because we're not utilizing, we don't have the troop numbers that we once had. So a lot of our guardsmen and reservists are going to be activated.
Which they shouldn't be.
Well, but again, Paul, that's another question. I mean, the reality of the test of the whole thing is that's going to happen. And we don't want to see good legislators and or elected people taken from these offices that we've elected. And that's what this question actually does. Clears up the language within that. And like Steve said, I mean, regular people in the military, they're prevented from running for these offices to begin with. So it just clears up for our state statutes. And we, Oklahomans, we are somebody that actually supports our military. And we strongly support our military. We're not just saying, make it political that we support our military. We strongly support them. And this is just one more of these questions that gives meat to that particular subject, how we support them. Because we want them to come back, we want them to represent it, because we are the people that elected them to these offices. So that's that question there. Now, on state question 770 and 771, I believe, I'm gonna let Mike Reynolds discuss those two because he was involved in these two state questions at the legislative body. I don't believe that you authored these bills, but did you? Were these your bills? Okay, these were his bills. See, I thought they were because by being a representative, sometimes this stuff's just thrown at you. You didn't know about it, and it's one of these situations that actually happened to Mike. And give a little background how that happened and about these state questions and why you're going to vote yes on these two state questions.
Well, yeah, it is surprising that I authored this bill since I only got like 2 passed into law in 12 years. And then this doubled my output. My brother called. My brother called me on a Thursday afternoon, and it was actually Wednesday. It was actually the day before the artificial deadlines that the legislature has created for itself to submit bills. And he said he had a lady down there in Cleveland County that he was about to have to sell her house. He's the county treasurer in Cleveland County. Excuse me. And she hadn't paid her property taxes in 5 years. And he said, I'm not going to sell her house, but by the law, I've got to. And so we need to get something passed. And so I asked him a little background. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But I called the House staff immediately and got one of my bills I actually had was in that area of election law. And so I got some language inserted immediately. And then we were able to get it through a committee the following week and bring it out and pass it through the process. I'm going to go back to the lady. She didn't know. She had been misadvised by someone that she was not responsible for her property taxes, and she owned the house. I guess her husband was killed in. There's another story to this that I've forgotten. Her husband was killed in the Fort Hood shooting, and so she would clearly have been covered if Barack Obama had declared that an act of domestic terrorism, I think was the proper term, and he refused to do that. So she was not covered, but she'd been advised that she was covered, so she wasn't. So we began looking at this, and I introduced the legislation, and boy, then I started getting more phone calls than I've ever had, and worked with some veterans groups and other people, because we found out that there was a problem in the law there, but there was a bigger problem. The law basically applied to 100% disabled veterans. And guess what? Deceased veterans, people that were killed on duty, it didn't apply to their spouses. And I guess the saying I've had all along is, gee, I thought dead was way past 100% disabled. So it didn't make any sense, and so everybody got on board for that. And that was going to be pretty easy, but when we began crafting it, some people that have, it was disappointing on the floor of the House, because the language that we got done initially was just to get a bill in the hopper because of the time frame that I was notified the day before, and people began mocking me because the bill was actually unconstitutional as drafted, and I said that on the floor of the House. This bill is unconstitutional as written. We haven't had time to change the language. It just came to our attention last week. We need to pass it, send it to the Senate, and then we'll get modifications made, which is what we did. And ultimately, we divided it into two state questions. One is to cover the fact that if someone is killed in the line of duty. The second question, and that's pretty easy, that's a slam dunk. The other to me is pretty easy, but we also discovered that if you bought a house, people were getting a little sticker shock, because if they were exempt, they were having to pay the property taxes for the first year. Because homes are assessed, what is this? You'll probably be getting maybe you have in the last few days, be getting something from the county assessor talking about the value of your home. And the exemptions are all declared on December 31st. Well, if you bought the house in March, you would think reasonably, I shouldn't have to pay property taxes from March until December. But because the house was assessed on December 31st, the property taxes were being assessed on the home, not on the individual, which I suppose kind of makes sense. So the second question, when to remedy that situation. So it's more convoluted, and in fact, my brother really didn't want me to run that, but what do I care? So, because now the county assessors, or the county treasurers will have to make a manual calculation. Well, big deal. We discovered it only applied to about 400 homes last year. So that manual calculation, because it's assessed and figured on December 31st, if someone comes in and presents that falls into that category, the county assessor will say, okay, well, you only owe 10 months of property tax, or you only owe 3 months of property tax, or however long they've lived in the house that year. But the other part of that is they've got make another calculation, and if I sell my house and and I'm exempt, then what happens is the person that buys my house doesn't have to pay property taxes for a year. So we're fixing that, so they do have to pay their property taxes. So that's what the second issue is. It's a little more convoluted, and maybe doesn't come through, but most people, by the time they get to the end of the November ballot, aren't going to read these. They're just going to say, oh, that's for veterans, okay.
How are you going to vote? I mean, even though we get closed ballots and all stuff, how are you going to vote on all three of these laws?
Well, the Supreme Court has said I can't really say how. No, I'm going to vote.
I do know one other legislator, what I'm going to consider a conservative legislator, is going to vote yes on all three of these also. And it's, I'm going to take the liberty and just mention his name, Jason Murphy. He's going to also vote yes on all three of these. So, and again, here's his newsletter, so I'm not just speaking for Jason, okay? Because again, I think the values that we need to remember, we want to help our veterans. We don't want to work against them. And that workplace violence, because the federal authorities, I'm going to say President Obama didn't want to call that Fort Hood shootings down there, wanted to call it workplace violence rather than an act of terrorism. I mean, that soldier and his family give up more than just his life. I mean, he give up his whole future and providing for his family. And we've got to help these people do that. And correct that. Yes, sir.
Bob, I don't know whether you know this, or Mike, or Steve. If we are lucky enough to get a Republican in the White House, can he reverse that decision and make that an act of terror rather than workplace violence, and allow those?
I have no idea. But it won't matter in Oklahoma if this law passes. But I don't know for the rest of the nation if that matters.
Well, the answer to that is yes. The President or the Department of Defense, if not prohibited, can make recommendations to Congress what constitutes war zones. And so what makes the acts of terror a little different is they're not recognized declarations of war, but yet they try to determine eligibility of soldiers that have been wounded. Or, for example, in the 1980s, you had a discotheque in Berlin that was bombed. You also had nuclear sites where soldiers had been shot guarding the nuclear sites in Germany by domestic terrorists. Those were all determined to be combat-related in-line-of-duty acts of terror, and they received Purple Hearts and full compensation for injuries from that, and those that died, it was considered as a combat death. So those designations can be made.
Thank you.
So I think that kind of answers the question right there. And it gets back to the simple question, who our leaders are really do matter. I mean, they really do matter. So, okay. Yes, sir.
I want to take the podium. I just want to talk to Mike Reynolds. When you leave the legislature, there'll be a vacuum. Really.
They'll all be back.
You perform a bird dog out there that nobody else does. And I want you to run for that office again. Don't take to heart you lost that election down there. There are other factors involved other than your competence and your popularity. Thank you.
His hat size went from 7.5 to 8.5.
4.5 to 5.5.
From 4.5. No, I mean, there'll definitely be a vacancy at the Oklahoma State Capitol, but let's don't forget this, okay? There's a lot of people these kind of things need to happen. I mean, we can't have the same legislators year after year after year after year. New people are going to raise up. It's kind of like in the pulpit. I mean, one great preacher dies, another one will raise up. God will provide that leadership. So, I mean, the Capitol didn't run because of Mike Reynolds. The Capitol ran maybe better at that time with Mike Reynolds out there, but it'll never stop. And our country's based upon that. We had great leaders that started us out. We're going to have great leaders that are coming up today. We've got some great ones running. I mean, good ones. Steve's going to be a definite compliment to our Congress when he's elected and go out there. He's not James Langford. He's not supposed to be James Langford. He's going to be unique and different. And each one of our legislators is the same way. I know personally some great legislators, young legislators, maybe not just in age, but in experience in the Capitol, raising themselves up and the madder they get, the better it'll be for us, okay? The more disgusting, because they actually learn in the process. And that's part of the problem with the legislative body, is that when you're new out there, you go out there because you want to change things because there was something wrong out there. And after you've been bid on and chewed on by certain people and lied to and whatever, that's what changes you as a legislator. Now, talking about that, now we've got one more thing we can talk about just real quickly, and we don't have much time to get into a whole lot of it. The rules are changing with a lobbyist. There was a newspaper article this morning. A lobbyist now will be able to spend, rather than $100, they'll be able to spend a maximum expenditure of $500. Now, I've heard both sides of this on people. Now, here's a place that I'm offended by a lobbyist, and I'll just say it from my perspective. There's our Lieutenant Governor, Todd Lamb, who I actually like. He's running commercials with his family, his two wonderful children. I mean, who would not want to have those two children? I mean, my gosh, really? I mean, those are wonderful kids, wonderful family. He's using those now as in the political field. Now they'll be challenged. Okay, once you put your family out there, you're going to be challenged. Because in the newspaper article, it also talks about a lobbyist from AT&T giving his son a $100 basketball ticket to go to the Final Four of the NCAA tournament. Now, is that right? Well, and the answer most people in this room are going to say, no, I kind of don't like that. I mean, I don't want, a lobbyist is now not only lobbying the person, they're lobbying the family members. In this newspaper article, it talks about that. Griffin Lamb, Lieutenant Governor Todd Lamb's son, got Final Four tickets from Alan Cox, representing AT&T on April 5th, a value of $100. Well, the idea of it is, what's wrong with a $100 gift? Well, you make that determining fact. I don't like that type of thing, and I think, but you can't legislate continually laws to bring up laws to represent one situation. This is where the family's got to be involved in that. If it was me, I would never allow a lobbyist to give a ticket to any member of my family. Now, I might myself, but there's a reason for that. If I don't want my family coming under attack, I've got to protect them fully. That would be the reason. Now, if I accept the gift, now I'm the one that's the meat on the table here. And that's why I say it that way. Lobbyists are a very important part of our government. We need lobbyists, and there's a reason we need lobbyists. And I think it's Mike Reynolds or somebody else in this room brought it to my attention. We love lobbyists that lobby for things that we like. We like that. We hate those lobbyists that lobby for things that we dislike. I'm so thankful that we have the NRA in the United States of America. Without the NRA, we would not have a Second Amendment, according to me. You wouldn't have to worry about our state lobbyist group like OK2A, they'd have been already gone because our Second Amendment would have been gone. So again, when we're talking about some of these things at High Noon Cup, let's look at all the different ways of thinking about things. And that's why we need the most liberal thinker to the most conservative thinker coming to these podiums, asking questions respectfully without trying to bash anybody or whatever the reason for it, or saying, oh, that's a dumb question or whatever. Well, some of these dumb questions sometimes need to be asked from this podium and or the audience. And I appreciate every one of you. Thank you for coming to High Noon Club. Thanks everyone for being at High Noon Club. Thank you.